Hello and welcome to Stampscaping 101. We have a piece of 3.5 by 5-inch stamp board. Okay, this is put out by Ampersand Art. I've done videos on this in the past, but I haven't done it for a while, and someone had inquired if I had some remaining inventory at one point in time, and I did, but I just don't sell it on off of our website anymore. But you can find it on certain locations. Now, if you're going to enter the word, you spell board with a B-O-R-D. That's kind of their naming convention over at Ampersand Art. But what this is a hardboard panel. You can see it's almost like masonite or something like that. But then it has this smooth clay surface on it. And there's different surfaces with Ampersand Art. They have things like for pastel board, gesso board. It goes on and on. I only use what they call Claybord Smooth, but in smaller incarnations they came out with this Stampbord product years ago. They're kind of relaunching it, and I think that the naming convention was something like art tiles or something of that sort. It kind of makes it a little bit more kind of wide open in terms of, the possibilities for people, in how they use it. Now, a lot of people used to use this material because it is kind of a little bit more of a thicker, kind of three-dimensional, type of piece. They used it for things like embellishments. Jewelry makers used it for jewelry making in the little 1-inch, inchy tile ones. There was all kinds of different possibilities with this. In the stamping world, I saw it mostly as embellishments and whatnot. But in these kind of larger sizes like this, larger than, say, like a domino, ATC, 2x2, multi-packed, all kinds of different sizes that it came in. I saw it more as like an embellishment, okay? But they do have larger pieces like this, and I think in the Stampboard convention, the 3.5 by 5 was about as large as it got. There were 4 by 4-inch ones that were perfect for tiles, and then they also had these different types of craft boxes that you can fit like 4 by 4s into, making like a coaster set or whatnot. But this material right here is one of the funnest materials to work on because of many reasons. The three-dimensional aspect of it, but also because this clay surface on it, which is not like a fired glazed ceramic tile or something like that. This clay on here is more akin to something like that you'd find on like scratchboard, or it could be like a clay surface like a smooth satin press, like cardstock or something like it, but thicker though. So, that being said, this clay surface accepts different media. It's porous. It's not like something that's sealed off, okay? It can take different types of inks, and they'll dry just fine on here. Takes dye-based inks just fine. You don't have to use something like a stays-on permanent ink or something of that sort. The one thing that it doesn't work so well with, because it has this smooth clay surface like this, is maybe it you wouldn't use something like you wouldn't build up like pastels or something like that because it is so smooth. Something like colored pencil, you can probably use it on there to a certain effect, but it's not going to build up as if the surface had some tooth to it, some texture. Okay. All right, so I thought we'd just do some experimentation on here. I've used this a lot over the years, but I haven't really, I wouldn't say I've experimented a lot on it. Like, I haven't used like a lot of alcohol inks or something like that on here. It's been mainly using this like I would, um, like a cardstock or something like that. I just do it on here for the purpose of being able to scratch back into it. Especially, I love the subtractive type of ability of this material. It's just so dynamic in that way. All right, now I've just been playing around with Nature Set 21, and why don't I do it again while I have it sitting right here. Specifically, I love how there's these windows in this scene right here. I'm wondering if I should do kind of a background first. I can do a background first, stamp over it, and then scratch into it. I don't know. I'll do that in another one. Maybe I'll play around with some alcohol inks on here. Like I said, I don't know. I just haven't really experimented a lot with this before. I've used it a ton. We even used this for years in our convention make and takes. I'd be doing something on glossy cardstock, and we'd have another make and take table going with the stamp board, and people would be experimenting with that. And I'll get to the tools that I have laid out here in that step, but I'll explain all those different tools. Okay, this is just like I said, it's a beautiful, beautiful stamping surface. It's the most beautiful feeling material, in my opinion, to stamp on. Okay, it's thick, it is dense, it is absorbent to the materials, but it's not so absorbent that any ink will run in it. Okay, that I found. Okay, I don't know, maybe someone has some like super juicy wet thing, but I don't think so, because clay, I mean, it's just a super fine clay, so it really absorbs it and it grabs it without spreading out. I guess I don't know whatever like the physics of it or something like that, but it just feels really, really good. And of course, it's just this board, so you don't have this kind of buckling type of surface. All right. Now, when I'm talking about all those different sizes, like the 2 by 2 inch ones or something like that, sometimes it's fun to just stamp a whole scene out. You might have seen this before, where someone stamps something like this out, and maybe they take like a smaller tile and they stamp that image again on it or something like that, and then they have this one part that's raised. So you'd stamp out a scene like this on paper, and then you just have the one kind of smaller part of it, like a 2 by 2. Here's like a little domino size, and you can have like one little part sticking out. Or you can just use something like this. Can you imagine stamping out something like a scene or something like that on paper? I mean, you can do it on the board like this too, but if you do this on paper and then you have like a word stamp like here, on there that's raised and sticking out. If you ever use any of these types of tiles like that, one of the things that everyone always mentions to me is when they use it, and they send it to a fellow stamper and crafter, everyone always wants to know how they did that. They think they, I don't know, mounted a piece of paper onto masonite or something like that. That's usually the comments that I always used to get, or feedback, when people have utilized the material. It came out, I don't know, maybe around 20 years ago at this point in time. Roughly about. I tend to think that it was a little bit before its time, though. So everyone that used it loved it, but it just didn't spread like I thought it would. Everyone was just used to stamping on matte or glossy cardstock at the time. But then people started kind of branching out and stamping on very unconventional surfaces, like a tile from Home Depot, but especially something like dominoes, okay? If you've been stamping for a while, you know what I'm talking about with the dominoes. But then when I saw those dominoes being used, something that was a totally unconventional surface to stamp on that required specialty types of inks. I had been aware of Ampersand Art's Claybord from years before, but I just told him, hey, I just think it's too early. But then when I saw dominoes, I happened to keep their information, and I called or emailed something, Ampersand Art, and I said, hey, years ago you got in touch with me about, packaging up some of your boards with my stamps because they thought, my stamps were more artistic in the stamping world than a lot of different types of stamps at the time. But I just said, hey, no one's used to paying a little bit more for these types of board things. Everyone's using, just two types of paper to stamp on. But then when I saw dominoes being used, I got in touch with them, and they were interested. They remembered. And, we looked into different sizes. They came out with a domino pack. Inchies were kind of popular at the time, stamping on little 1 inch by 1 inch, pieces of paper. So they came out with those types of things, and like I said, people really liked them, but it just didn't really catch on as much as I would have thought. I would have thought people were just ready for it rather than stamping on something like a domino. Oh, and then you might remember, if you've been stamping for a while, the pin exchanges. People would exchange pins. They'd go to conventions or whatever, and everyone would be exchanging pins like you do at Disneyland or something like that. But like the small pieces like this, if you stamp it on and put a little pin backing on it, it made for perfect pins. You can put little metallic inks around the side. You can embellish. You can build things on this type of material. A crocodile, if you know what that is, with those punches. The crocodile punches through this hardboard panel like it's butter. It just punch, and goes right through it. So it was just really a fantastic medium to work with. But I don't know. I stopped carrying it at some point in time. I stopped carrying a lot of accessories. And I don't know. So, just not a lot of people had it. So I stopped demoing it a lot. But I do love it. And like I said, I stand by my statement of this being one of the most beautiful surfaces that you can ever stamp on in terms of feel, in terms of the end result and whatnot. I don't know, pretty much what you see is what you get when you stamp on there. See, I'm stamping that. I stamped it out here and putting it in the background like that. I don't know. I can't say enough about this material. I mean, I've said it before. There's a gallery and additional, consolidated imagery or videos on our website still. I kept that area on the website still, just because I believe in the product and whatnot. I don't use anything I don't believe in. Now, I might try something for the first time if I've never used it before, and, I'll like it to, different degrees, but I promise you I'll never, I'll never say anything that I don't believe fully. There's just not enough, there's not enough life to be kind of using things that we don't really want or believe in, in terms of stamping. I'm stamping a lot, and I just have an endless amount of things that I still want to try out, so, I'm not going to use something that I think is kind of, I don't know, ridiculous or pointless or whatnot. I have different opinions, so the things that I believe too, aren't necessarily, fact or anything like that, but here's this little tile. Look at this, no buckling or bows or anything like that, bending and curling of the paper and whatnot. You don't have to mount this on something to make it stiff. I think it looks good to mount it on, put a couple photo squares on the back here and, put it onto a folding card or whatnot. Really fantastic. Christmas ornaments. People made Christmas ornaments out of this type of thing. Now, you can't really cut this unless you have, you have some electric tools or something like that. You're not going to cut it with a mat board. This is like a masonite, like a clipboard panel, except this board here is archival. Okay, so now there's different ways we can finish it off. I'm going to use some alcohol inks on this. I don't know, I've probably done that sometime in the past, but let's set this a little bit. I have a re-inked pad here, and I believe that because I've taken this and I've put it in there, I mean, it's not going to be coming off on my hand like it would, as if I stamped onto, glossy cardstock or something like that, and it's sitting on there for a little bit, or something like foil. This clay really absorbs pretty fast. But let's heat set it anyways because there might be some residual surface moisture for when I start toning this in and coloring it. That's the easiest heat setting you'll ever do on any paper. You can leave it right there. I don't know if it would burn. I'm not saying leave it there for 5 minutes or something like that, but it'll never buckle. It's completely flat, unlike, papers, right? Okay, so let's see. What should we color this with? Let's color it in multiple ways, okay? Let's try just a cotton ball onto with dye-based ink. Okay, I'm thinking this as I'm doing this. Okay, so if I want to do any kind of dye-based inks on here, and I do plan to use some alcohol inks, okay, do the dye-based inks first, because if you put a layer of alcohol down and it creates kind of a layer of that alcohol ink, dye-based inks won't stick to alcohol inks really well. It's just like putting like a oil surface down with pigment inks or something like that. If you do that, then oil under water doesn't work real well, but water under oil works. So as a foundation type of color, you might want to go with something like this. I mean, I can do different colors too. Shall we do let's do like a sunset type of scene on here. All right. Let's go with a couple different yellows. Well, I haven't used like a vast array of different colors in a while. I've been doing things like pigment inks on different types of foils, two-color inks, black and white on foil or whatnot, colored foils. So this is a little bit of a change here. All right, so what I'm doing, I'm just taking a look at, here's some distress inks and whatnot that I might use. But what I like to do is I like to get my pads out in the color scheme that I plan on working in. All right. Who knows, once I lay this down, maybe I don't know, maybe I won't be doing so much of the alcohol inks. I might not need to. Let's see how it goes here. Okay, let's start off with some of my lighter tones. And what you do is you just kind of get things in order of darkness, okay? If you don't know which one's darker than the other, it's not going to matter. They're close enough, okay? But this is where I usually start working. I start working with lighter tones if I'm working with colored work. And you can use a paper towel or something like this. Oh, I have this new old shirt that I wanted to kind of play around with too. I thought an old rag would be kind of one of the most ideal color applications, ink application devices out there, because it's like a cotton t-shirt or something like that. It's very absorbent and whatnot. Okay, now looking at this, I am dragging around a little bit of that ink. I probably could have heat set it a little bit longer, but I'm not going to worry about that. If it dragged a lot, then I would heat set it a little bit more. But what I'm doing right here is I'm just kind of adding some tone in here. Okay. I want to retain a little bit of lightness, I think, to represent either a light source or reflected light on the surface area here. Okay, now here's some things that if you haven't done scenes before, and you're used to using outline images where you just color in whole areas, okay? I'm going to show you, I mention this all the time in my scenes, but the difference between what I'm doing on a scene and often like outline styles of designs where people just, they don't get the concept because they just know that, for example, this whole area down here is water. And a beginner to scenic stamping always feels the inclination to fill that whole area in equally, okay? It's like a space within, I don't know, like an outline design. It's like a cell that you fill in uniformly. It's just colored in completely, okay? But here's what I'm doing right here. See this right here? See how I'm kind of making my area around here a little bit darker up there? But there's an area, and it's a small area, like back in here. I'm just retaining some of that light, okay? But down here, and I have a video on this called Easy Lighting, I think, or something like that. Easy Scenic Lighting or Easy Lighting. What I do is I just mention the two areas of light. One up here and one down here somewhere. It could be offset or something like that. It doesn't really matter. But what you do is you just retain an area that's lighter up top. It doesn't have to be the big area of white. It's just lighter, okay? So we get something like this. And people always tell me, you know, when they do composition, they get that down pretty fast. They say, oftentimes tell me, they got the compositions and everything down, the color, layering, and all that, they get that. But sometimes it's the lighting that they feel that, you know, their lighting schemes in their pieces is a little bit weak, okay? And it just means that what they've doing is they're filling in too much, okay? They're not retaining some of these lighter areas like this, okay? Now, when I move into my incrementally darker tones, now this isn't dark, but okay, just ink up like that and apply. I'll just apply this in roughly the same area as I did with the previous color. Okay. Now the first colors, I mean, because it gets the most amount of coverage, takes the longest. When you move into these darker tones, it's not going to take that long. But here's what you do. And here's what you have to kind of have conscious awareness of. Don't tone out your lighter areas, okay? Retain that so that you still have your lighting scheme. If I tone this all out, there's no lighting scheme anymore. It's just all mono value, okay? All right, now this video, I'm getting sidetracked here talking about that. I like to talk about all the aspects of, you know, a piece when I'm putting it together, though. But this is Stampbord, okay? So as I'm doing this, see, this surface right here is, you know, it's damp a little bit. You know, because I just applied wet ink into that. So the clay surface, it's probably a little bit damp, but it is taking this material, you know, this ink just fine. It's absorbing it right into the surface. I don't think I'm anywhere near like a super saturation or something like that. Applying this one's brilliant yellow on here. Okay, now here's what you do. Going back to lighting scheme, as I'm applying this down here, I'm being consciously aware of this surrounding area, so I'm not going to apply maybe as much of this color as I did with, you know, say the first color. So what that means is, you know, when you get darker and darker and darker, you become a little bit more perimeter oriented. You know, this isn't so dark of a color yet, and as I apply this, it's getting drier and drier, so, you know, I can go into this area, like right in here with it, but I'm coming into an area with it barely on my applicator. Usually I use a paper towel for this. I thought I'd use a cotton ball. I just want to kind of play around with your medium. All right, now see, this is the way I'm working. I'm working from, these are just little types of jumps, right? And that's what makes this entire process really easy. If you jump from something like this to this, that's a big contrast there. You can do it, but it just, you know, your color schemes won't be quite as deep and glowing, vibrant. It doesn't mean they won't look good, but they'll just look different. But if you want kind of a very easy approach to color layering, easy color layering, I should say, then just take your steps nice and slow. Okay, now see what this looks like right here. This is ochre. And see how that ochre is just going a little bit darker. Here's the ochre up here, and here's the previous tones down here. It's getting a little bit muddy. I probably should have heat set a little bit more. Okay, but it's not bad. It's kind of looking a little bit murky, I think, because I am dragging. You can even see the black on my cotton ball here, huh? But it's okay. It's kind of incorporating it in within the piece. Okay, now as I'm applying this in here, now I don't want all my imagery to disappear or anything like that, but what I need to be aware of too, you don't have to be so much aware of it if you've just started using this, but we're going to be doing some subtractive processes in here so you can remove ink. That's a big difference between this type of surface and just about any other type of surface that you can work with. In terms of colors, okay, and different types of inks, you can remove things like pigment inks on the foils, which I'm doing a lot. But this is just your inks, any type of ink you use. Alcohol, pigment, dyes. On Claybord, because of that clay surface, you can remove it, or you can remove a certain portion of it. Let's move up to this distress right here, walnut stain. All right, taking it in. I'm just using the one cotton ball. I don't have to switch, to a different color with every new color. Just use the same one. See how this area in here, I'm kind of hitting it in the shadow areas. With, this is a darker color. It's not super dark, but you just kind of hit it in your shadows. You maybe don't come into these areas as much with your darker colors. Okay, and that's how you retain that lighting scheme. It's darker on the perimeter, kind of like a vignette. It contains your composition really nicely. Let's come into my cabin. See, I can even put it, I want my windows to be nice and light, but I don't have to mask them off with this because I can just scratch that back out if I want to. It's a formidable ability, subtractive processes when it comes to stamping. It's something that just doesn't really exist. There's bleaching things that you can do, but I'm just talking about something that's inherently part of its ability, as opposed to kind of forcing something like, a bleaching process, kind of a very invasive type of technique. All right, see how that's going right there? Oh, I love to spray these pieces too. When you're done with it, spray them with like a photopolymer or something like that, a nice thick glaze, and it looks absolutely beautiful. It does have it. I mean, these aren't ceramic or something like that, but it does have the look of kind of a glazed fired tile or something of that sort. Okay, peeled paint. Kind of a greenish tinge, right? Why not add, some of that down here? I just switched to a different part of my cotton ball, but I'm using the same cotton ball. Let's see how that goes. Yeah. Now, for green to show up, I'm going to have to come into my light area a little bit. It's not going to read as green over all that brown and, whatever, but this might give it a little bit of a different tinge in my video called Creating Color Glows. I talk about using analogous colors which are colors right next to each other on the color wheel to create color glows. When you put analogous colors next to each other, it creates this color glow. And that's what we're kind of doing here anyways. We're kind of going from a yellow to an ochre, which is kind of moving it into that orangish tinge. So that's why things look like they're glowing, but we're also utilizing the fact that we're not coloring everything in here. We're retaining some light. Now, I don't have a big area of light down here anymore, but it is lighter than this area, so we have our lighting scheme still, right? Now that's, in terms of concept, if you've just been coloring everything in all the time, you see an object, that's that color. This other object over here is a different color, okay? That's one thing that you can do. I mean, you can color all these different components different, but in terms of what I was getting at was, in terms of a concept though, all it is kind of putting the brakes on your usage of tone. You're not doing something extra, you're doing less work because you're doing less coloring, right? There's this area in here that's much lighter than the surrounding area. I didn't color in the whole thing that color, okay? So it's really doing less. And what it is just, you know, going like this in some areas and then coming into our lighter areas like that. So you get this range of dark to light. So I have dark to light, in, you know, and then I'm hitting some areas underneath my shadows, you know, making them a little bit darker. I haven't forgotten about the alcohol inks, by the way. I'll use some of them as just, I don't know. I don't think it even needs it, but, you know, I think they'll be great additions to this. By the way, okay, so this tile too, now when I'm looking at it, it is a flat looking application of media, okay? The look of it is something akin to a matte piece of cardstock, okay? Matte because it's not sealed with a glossy sealant or anything like that on the paper, cardstock. So this is what it looks like. It looks flat, okay? It's not shiny, all right? It has a little bit of satiny type of look to it, but for the most part, it's almost like matte cardstock. Okay, so if you use alcohol inks on here, alcohol inks are going to stay on the surface more than absorbing into this, so alcohol inks, if you build them up, are going to be shiny, okay? So you'll have these shiny little areas on here that might not match up with the overall matte finish of the piece. So what you do is you go back to what I was mentioning with your spray sealants. You can use a matte spray sealant to make the alcohol inks match the matte surface of this, or you can just go glossy and make the matte surface match more of the alcohol ink finish, okay? And I think that just brings a little bit more continuity into it. Okay, now see, this is black right here. You know, remember what I was saying about you don't go in quite as far with your darker tones? Well, the black one right here, I'm kind of using it more in the four corners like this. Okay, let's come into our shadows down here underneath our porch. Like so. Let's make this area in the background here a little bit darker. The darker you make certain areas of your scene, the lighter the lights are going to seem by contrast. It's a fun little, I wouldn't say trick, it's just kind of a visual kind of manipulation convention, because we're not working with lights in the scene, we're working with contrast, right? There's not like an LED light in the back of the scene or something like that, you know, popping out. It's just we're only working with contrast. You make it a little bit darker here, and look at that glow right there. Look how beautiful this piece is too in terms of a tile, you know. It's just really fun to play around with. Okay, so that is that. Now let's play around with some different tones. I don't know how much of this will show up on here because, you know, I have a pretty fully realized piece right here in terms of the color and lighting scheme in here. Well, let's pick out some colors that are roughly, you know, the same types of colors that I've used on here. Let's see if we can get a little bit of a color embellishment going with some pens. Okay, see how those kind of harmonize with each other. There's some greens, and we move into a little bit of the brown tone. You'll notice there's not any too harsh of a color, like super dark. It's because I like to start off light. So again, make things visual for yourself and see if they kind of harmonize to yourself, you know, to your eye. If you don't know, it doesn't matter, just try it out, okay? But you'll notice if something kind of really stands out, you know, when you're doing something like this. Not that it can't be used, but see something like that, like the purple really stands out quite a bit, you know? Now, if you're doing, you know, like different cells, different colors, where colors are next to each other, that's fine. You know, it can harmonize in a triadic combination or something like that. But we're layering these colors over one another, okay? So like a purple over the top of, you know, yellow or something like that. I don't know if that would really work very well. Okay, so here we go. Oh, here's the thing too. I'm usually doing just scratching out my windows here, but let's put a little bit of a yellow light. Let's put a warm light into my cabin like that. And let's put some of that warm light reflecting down on our porch, like so, okay. Get some of this additional warm light, excuse me, into the water down here. Again, you know, retain your areas, but I like to go for a little bit of a streak like that. See that transition like that? That's kind of like the transition like that. So you start in your darker area, and you just kind of streak into that light area. Now, this is a very light color that I'm working with, so it's not making a huge difference, which is what I want. I want things to develop nice and controlled and smooth and whatnot, you know. It just makes for a very easy process. User-friendly, you might say. Okay. Let's see, it's coming here into our cabin. Under the eaves. It's just, you know, a little bit of a brown tinge. So, on the side of that, I can put a little bit of brown underneath there, like so. Oh, here's my cypress trees. Why not put a little bit of this tone on the cypress trees like this? Okay. Maybe you leave parts of the cypress tree as is, okay. These are my cypress knees, by the way. All right. Here's a little bit of elm green. Kind of looks like an olive green. You can blend that in there a little bit. This is kind of standing out a little bit too much, so what I'll do is I'll blend this in a little bit more. So I'll go with that, and then let's come in with our lighter one, and let's blend that in a little bit. This is kind of like that green peeled paint, but in a more, you know, kind of a targeted application with this tip like that. Okay. All right. It's just kind of layering things. Or not kind of, it is, but you really kind of build things up. All right. I just used a little bit of that, just put a few streaks in there. Here's quite a bit darker brown. Okay, let's get some of that in here. It's much too harsh like that. See that line? But alcohol inks, what can we do with those? Yeah, it comes with a blender pen, right? So I'm just getting some of that ink kind of laid down on that. But then you can go back in with your blender pen. I can never find my blender pen. It's because it's clear, it has that clear top, you know. Okay, here's my blender pen. Or just use a lighter version, you know, one of the other colors that you've already used. Let me just use this blender one here, though. And I'll show you where this is kind of brown. I'm not necessarily removing it. I guess I am removing it to some degree in some areas, but for the most part, I'm kind of spreading it out a little bit. It's like, you know, like a watercolor or something like that, and you know, going back into it. And watercolor paint when you have it on a kind of a wet surface. And you're just going back in, you can add a little texturing to... See, this alcohol ink is just sitting right there on the surface, so it really is open to manipulation at this point in time. You can really move it around. And if I keep going on here, you know, you'll end up removing all of it. So I don't want that. I want to get a little texture of it. I want a little of that hue of it. Alright. Go and blend it a little bit on your cabin. Okay, and I'll come into my water. I'll blend in some of those kind of greenish streaks. See, I'm kind of going into my lit area and kind of sweeping out. We swept in from dark to light like that, you know, that little gesture, but when you go in the water and you're kind of removing like this, what you do is you work from the inside out. So that kind of looks a little, you know, it's kind of fun because this is water down here and you're kind of going with this watery type of application. It's not water, it's alcohol, but it gives you that kind of, that watercolor style of look, you know, that I really like. Now, I'm not moving around. I'm not putting back into solution my dye-based inks. What I'm doing with this, this blender pen is it's manipulating the alcohol ink that's been applied. So feel free to kind of build it up. Here, let me remove. See, I can remove some of this lighting on my windows here and the reflection, like that. All right, let me give you a close-up here, and you can see this water down here. See that those different types? That's that cool kind of alcohol ink type of look you can give this in here. See, it's like that. See, I like that kind of look and that texturing that you can get from doing this type of thing. And you can put layer after layer of something like this too on this board, and it's not going to, you know, buckle or anything like that because it's hardboard, you know, panel. So this area back in here, this could use a little bit of refinement, I think. So go in here and just kind of move it around a little bit. See that? And I can go overboard with this. Sometimes I remove too much because it's kind of fun. It's like creating, you're like putting light back into these areas, and it's kind of creating that little glow. Like right in there. See that? Sometimes you go over here in the darker area and you have some of that ink on here, so when you move into this other area, it's kind of applying, but then you just kind of keep working it. And you get those nice, cool textures from the alcohol. And see, that's just, I mean, it just creates a more varied type of look. And that's what I was doing on the trees, too. See, the trees over here, I want a little of that texture, and it kind of looks like bark in a way, you know. When you add these types of textures like that, texturine touches, yeah, a little bit of green got picked up from over here, but doesn't that green look good in that brown? Doesn't it create a little bit more continuity? See, if I want to illuminate this a little bit, see this right here? You just illuminate that side of the, the trunk like that. Now it's being lit by this area over here, and it's darker on this side. So fun stuff. Now going back in and kind of removing some of that ink, it doesn't look the same as if I've never inked it up to begin with. It has a different look, So you're saying, well, you're removing that ink. Why not just not apply it to begin with? Well, I wouldn't get that kind of watery color type of texturing that way. Okay, so here's the thing. I'm not going to use all these because all these wouldn't be good for this. But okay, ampersand art. I don't know what they have anymore. Okay, I got these years ago. But this is kind of a wire brush like this, and it has those kind of bent, sorry, let's see if I can get this to focus in. It has this bent kind of wiring. It's good for a very expressionistic type of removal of ink, okay? Like if you're working with it doesn't have to be a larger piece, but I see it being used as a larger piece, but these wires on here could scratch back into your surface. Not necessarily this type of scene though, but let's say if you're doing a pen and ink, black and white of somebody's hair and you want to put some textures into it like that. This is called a wire brush, okay? And it has about, I thought it was 4 like pins in here like that. And that gives you a removal of 4 little things. If you go this way, then it'd be different. But, you can kind of remove ink with that, like sharp little points. It's probably good for something like cross hatching or something like that, to reveal highlights or something of that sort. And then you have these. Now, the latest incarnation of these is different from these ones too. These ones are really old. This one, the blue one, I think was the oldest. But these are fiber brushes, okay? And see, as I move this up like this, those fiberglass hairs come out, okay? If you ever get these, you never want it out more than a little bit. But these are fiberglass hairs, okay? And that means they're made of glass. So it does this kind of sweeping removal. It looks like you're erasing it. You can't use an eraser on ink, but you can scratch away into it, and you'd be kind of buffing it out with fiberglass hairs like that. It's almost akin to as if there was sandpaper up here. Difference between sandpaper is you can do a little bit, but then, that keeps changing, the sandpaper, and then you have to change to another bit, where this one is this fiberglass brush. It's comfortable in the hand, and you sweep away very, very thin layers of media, okay? But what happens is people start using it and not very much is coming off, so they think, oh, I got to extend this out, and so they get these hairs out, and these are bristles, glass bristles, so they start breaking because they're not condensed into this tight little compact area. So you never have it out. I mean, this is a tiny little bit that's sticking out, so they're not going to be moving around and breaking, okay? All right. So that being said, I really like using that. Oh, and my 2 main tools are my scratch knives. These are Speedball scratch knives. Ampersand has their own ones too, but this one's like a spoon, and this one's like a little spear. This one right here gives you a thin, consistent scratch. And this one here you use on its side to give you kind of a more rounded, kind of varied removal. All right, so what do you do here? What are we talking about in terms of lighting or something like that? I use like pigmentings to apply like a smoky haze in here, and I'll do that too. But I'll show you how you can apply some different types of looks in here. I'm thinking about some additional imagery in here too, maybe in some pigmenting. So I'm going to be careful about where I scratch, because when I do scratch into this, I might be kind of creating a little bit of a recessed area into my board, okay? And if you have a recessed board and you stamp something over it, it might not get into that groove, okay? So that being said, let's just proceed, and I'll think about that when I get to it. Okay, so this area down here, all right? I have these little striations in my water, okay? in my designs like that. I don't know if you can see them in there. But in water types of scenes, you know, we're not always doing water scenes or something like that. Okay, but you see where my lighter areas are that are reflections of above, like the posts right here, you know, little water striations like that. White. That'd be a good place to start off with. Okay, let's see if I can get in here. I will try to make a point of not working outside the viewing area of this, but what I do is I'm just lightly, see, I'm getting this line, this little water highlight line through a series of scratches like that. Do you see those lines starting to appear? This is just kind of like a refinement on lighting, okay? And what I'm doing here, I'm not trying to just gouge, you know, into it like, you know, expressionistic types of scratches, which you can do on here. But on here, I'm just kind of, the way that I work with, it's more of a kind of a controlled surface like that, or controlled removal on the surface, okay? So see that right there, my little scratches in there? It's like creating white within this field of light, darkness, okay? Let me show you what I mean here. See, I'll show you. I think it looks like more of like a surface now, like a mirrored watery surface, you know, when you get this texturing on there like so. So it's little things like that, you know, that's really fun to do. All right, now you see these columns right here. I couldn't work around that column by just toning in, you know, with a cotton ball. It'd be too hard to stay in there. But on the stamp board, you can go in here like this, and these little, like a pier, you know, pilings or whatever, you can go back in and kind of add that back in there, light like this. And there's my little reflections in there. See how that kind of comes out like that? Let's get the rooftop right here. The rooftop, if there's kind of overhead lighting in here, okay, I can kind of remove. So I'm not trying to erase all the ink that I've applied on here. I'm just trying to, you know, kind of illuminate that application and kind of add a little bit of detailing onto it. See, I'm kind of just scratching in the direction of my wood like that. And that little rooftop has a little bit more texturing and maybe weathering to it or something like that. See that right there? It doesn't have a little bit more texture. You can go for a very soft texture too. You can take like sandpaper and sand away in here if you got too dark. It's one of the most forgiving surfaces that you'll ever, you know, use. Like I said, fine-grained sandpaper, medium grit, it's going to give you a different look. Let's say I got this area and it was too dark. Well, you can use your, you know, your alcohol blender pen and take some more of that off. But let's say I hit it with too much dye-based ink, okay? That's not going to come off with an alcohol-based pen. So what you do is you just come in here like this. Let me see if you can see what I'm doing right here. See? It's a very light touch. And can you see that soft removal of ink starting to take place? So you can see that little area like that. But see, I'm doing it through a series. Let's create a little bit of a striation over here into this area, okay? See that? It's just like you're sweeping off. There's like little dust on here that's kind of coming off. You see that right in there? So don't rush it. Don't go like this and say, you can't see anything. Okay, that's not what it's doing. It's just removing a tiny layer of media. Okay? And you just kind of stay with it. See this little area in here? I mean, I think that looks okay, but let's come into it a little bit more. See, I'm kind of adding some of this light into that darkness. It's kind of creating a little bit more of a transition from that light into the dark, so we don't have this kind of abrupt, you know, ending. See that like that? Doesn't that look kind of a little bit more like a mirrored surface of light? Okay, you can see this right here. Let's do the same thing right here. So it's a little refinements. I think this looks a little bit more water-based when you put in these little details like this. See this right here? You can do this. This would look fantastic if you're doing little wisps in your sky for clouds or something like that, right? It's not just water, and it's not just for like a swamp or something like that. It's a very relaxing process right here. Okay, do you see what I did in here? Look at that. Fiber brush. Okay, now that, like I said, the fiber brushes look different. I think it's this red plastic one. That was the latest incarnation, but it works the same exact way. This background area. Let's I don't know, kind of describe it as water. So let's put in some of those striations that are found in the foreground and the background as well. Like that. Or if I can illuminate it a little bit more like that. See, like that, a little area back in there. All right, I think that looks pretty fun. That was really effective over here too. Let's go in here a little bit more. All right, how's that look? Right in there. So I did that one, I think. Just now. Looks a little bit more watery, doesn't it? Now you can come into it too if you have like some really specific things that you want to, a little scratch, a little highlight. Let me try to find some opportunities here, like down here in these bushes, let's say. So these bushes get a little bit muddled, so I can put a little bit of these little marks like this. It puts a little bit of lighting onto my bush. This is the needle, kind of spear looking one. Now this type of lighting is already on my design, to a degree. See these little areas on the top of these bushes and whatnot? It's already on there. See, like that? So what you can do in the lit areas, you can just kind of reiterate it a little bit, and it just puts a little bit more texturing and lighting in there. See, that's the difference between this side and this side. I put that little lighting in there. Okay, now it'll show up here a little bit more because this area is so much darker, so I don't want to illuminate this too much, but let's put a little bit of texture onto the bushes in here. So I'm just kind of doing this little scratchy type of thing. You can do something too. You can put a scratch back into it and it reveals the white of the board, right? But then if you want these little scratches to be yellow, a color, then you just color them up with yellow. So they'll stand out, but they won't stand out so much. They'll be standing out white. So it's not, this whole process is, I always talk about this circular type of application of media, meaning you can apply, then remove and apply, with certain types of surface media combinations. And this is certainly one that you can do that with. I can remove here all the way to white and then put in a different color. I can put in blue there if I wanted to. All right, so here's some of my knees. Let's, illuminate some of that, a little bit on the sides of the trunk facing the light, if I want to. Like right in here. So I kind of put that little lighting on those. Okay, now I did a very soft removal with this. Do like a real sharp removal with this one right here. So you can kind of have both a soft mark and a very sharp mark for textural difference. Let me change my exposure here a little bit. All right, as the scene gets a little bit darker, you're going to have to change your exposure on your camera. Okay, I'm just going to make this cypress here stand out a little bit, so I put a little bit of a highlight on that side of the tree. I don't want to do too much. There's not very much white in this scene in general, so adding this kind of white type of highlighting kind of stands out a little bit. But you can also just remove less like that. But see, this cypress right here stands out from in here, just because that little line right there. So you wouldn't put that line in with, like a fiber brush, but you can do it with, a very exacting type of tool like that. You'll find kind of doing this removal type of process some of the most relaxing type of process you'll ever do. I used to teach classes using this stamp called the tonal applicator, one of the loudest stamp classes because of the process you used it with. But then I started teaching Stampbord, and when people would do this type of mark like this, I think it was the quietest class you ever saw. So we got from something really loud to something very, very quiet. Putting some of these reflections down in the water. All right. That is really fun stuff to do. All right. Let's go in and finish this off with a, let's go with my VersaFine Clair. I was going to go with the Brilliance, but since we're working on this type of board, I think the VersaFine Clair gives you some of the best pigment ink black applications. I just happen to have the black. I don't have VersaFine Clair in colors, if it comes in color. Maybe I should try some sometime. Okay, so we have our hanging Spanish moss right here. I have a left and right side. I usually have the, the right side coming in from the right. Go like this. And the pigment ink should stamp over the top of the alcohol inks just fine. Pigment inks are oil-based, so no problem, stamping right over alcohol ink. Look at that. How that really, doesn't that give this extra dimension? This is the closest thing to our eye, but when we put something over the top of it, it pushes it into the background. Okay, and this is the left one. My VersaFine Clair pad is very, very juicy, so I've got to be careful that I don't over ink. And it's super juicy, so just nice, light, even pressure. Okay, so that right there. Put another one right here, just to create, you know, a little bit of extra depth. Okay, now we have our cypress knees done in a black dye-based ink, but why don't we go with that again in a pigment ink black for, again, extra depth. Okay, so this area down here kind of gets a little muddled right here. Okay, but let's really kind of increase the depth in that space with a very dark black. Like that. See that right there? See how much more that stands out. And let's give it a little bit more depth. Let's go with a pigment ink black over the top of, you know, dye-based black. Something like this. Alright, so you have your dye against pigment. You can see the differences. Now, I just stamped out this pigment ink one. And that, you know, it'll take a little bit of time for it to dry. So it's standing out a little bit more, too, because it's very glossy and shiny and wet right now. But even when it dries, it'll be quite a bit darker than the matte-looking dye-based ink that's been applied down there. The dye-based inks are inherently black, but of course, when you stamp it on a matte surface, they'll look matte. Okay, this is a little bit of the lily grass stamp. Okay, and why not just do this in some of the Claire. All right, so we have that in there. It creates for a, you know, I think this is a two-dimensional surface right here, but I think that looks fairly deep in space. And I mean, you can achieve that with different types of looks, but just with these additional textures, like right in here, the lighting, the soft removal and whatnot, it just kind of builds up more and more like that. Okay, let me heat set this right here, and we'll see if we want to apply anything else. Okay, those thick applications of the VersaFine clay are taking a while to dry. Now, I know this will dry on here just fine because people can use oil paints on Claybord Smooth, and they do, and it dries fine, right? It's an art media, so oil paints will dry, but I might have to let this set for a little bit and come back to it. I'll let it kind of air dry a little bit. I want to use a little bit of white pigment ink in here, but I have these little bits in here that are kind of wet still. Actually, it is starting to dry. I don't know. I'm just staying on there a lot longer, and it is drying up. No problem. Okay, that is drying just fine, but I have to take my son to piano practice right now. Anyways, I can see it drying up. You can even tell, certain parts of the, like these knees right here, a little bit less glossy looking than the wet parts are. So, all right, air drying here for a little bit of time, and I will be back to finish this piece off. All right, I am back, and it has been about an hour or so, and as you can see, you can really tell the residual moisture on some of these areas, but then the areas that look flatter are dry. So this is a combination of the heat setting and air drying. So like I said, there's not going to be any problem if you just want to have these sit out to air dry over time. Of course, the heat setting really expedites the entire process. Okay, now because I can just, stay in one area with the heat gun because this is on board as opposed to paper, you got to be careful that this board does get pretty hot, as far as holding it. All right, I think that looks pretty good in terms of the drying and kind of the overall incorporation of all the different types of media on here. Sometimes when you use alcohol inks that are very shiny, in addition to the pigment inks on certain types of papers, they can look very shiny and whatnot, and sometimes the dye-based inks can, have a much duller sheen to it, and you can tell, the different types of inks on here, like from here to here. I don't think it looks too, I don't know, non-integrated. I don't know, whatever. They look pretty good, just in terms of that integration, I think. But let's bring in some brilliance. Okay, now that drying time of that Claire was a lot longer than if I just used, a Brilliance Graphite Black. Brilliance Graphite Black looks pretty good too, in terms of your impressions. I just like the VersaFine Claire a little bit more in terms of detail. Brilliant, other brands of inks too look pretty good too. I don't know if you can really tell a lot, but I don't know, if you have the two, you might as well just use whichever one is your preference. Look at this, my paper down here is really buckled because of all the heat that I used. I usually don't get that on my kind of blotter paper, that I'm working on. Okay, so let's use a little bit of this mist. I always like this kind of misty type of look whenever I'm doing these types of water scenes. I think it just gives it a really great atmosphere. But and most of the times I'm to tell you the truth, I'm very honest about this. It masks away it covers up the kind of my weaker points, but I think this is looking pretty good just as is. But So instead of kind of masking and hiding weaknesses, I think this will just be just straight enhancement, hopefully. Okay, so I'm just working with a new cotton ball here. I'm not working with the one that I, applied all my, dye-based inks with, but this is a light color. So you start in your light area and then work into your dark areas. When you're working with darker tones, you start in the darker area and then work into the light, okay? All right, so lighting. This is kind of a great complement to your, very detailed scratches and ink removal, the light areas, okay? So just work into it slowly. See, you kind of tap and then move, okay? When people are kind of getting used to this type of motion when applying inks, I'm usually applying it, tapping, and then moving, okay? Tapping, then moving. You don't do it 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, okay? Kind of apply it for a while, and then it comes off of your applicator. And then you tap into those areas, in this case, with a drier touch, so you're applying less ink, okay? And that's the same thing with darker inks when you're doing darker. Apply it for a while, let it get a little bit drier, and then come into your lighter areas so you're not coming into it with a big, thick application of that ink. Okay, but see, look at that glow right there. And you get that glow by applying very little, okay? Very little at a time, okay? So, I mean, you can add more if you want to, but look at that. Really nice glow there in the background. It's got that really great illumination, doesn't it? And plus, when you also do this, you vary your black and white, your black impressions in there. So some of it's gray and some of it's darker black. So you get variation within your impressions as well. Now, remember how I kept this area light up here? Now that has afforded me the ability, because it is white already, to come in with some additional white and to lay it down. It blends into an area if it's inherently that color already. All right, so kind of adding this down, and so. Doesn't it push those trees into the background? Okay, this area over here, let's get a little bit of this haze. Now, I don't put it everywhere because I think it's more effective to oscillate it, okay? So in other words, I'm not putting it all at the base of this tree or all over my tree. I'm putting it kind of on the side of the tree that's, kind of closer to this illuminated area, our light source, our reflected light area. See that? Come into this area a little bit. kind of apply a little bit more than what you think looks ideal, because when this dries, it'll dry darker. And then when you spray it, you lose some of the opacity of how it looks when it's been freshly applied. It's translucent, but it gets even more transparent looking when you spray it, so a little bit more than what you think you'll need, or from what looks best. All right, let me put a pretty good amount right here that'll look like this kind of light is kind of creeping around the corner like that. And in this illuminated area, you can put a pretty good amount because it's already very light, so maybe in the very illuminated area, you'd get more of that kind of mist glowing, right? Because that moisture in the air, you know, being hit with so much kind of light. I can go outside and spray seal this without worrying about this blowing away too, you know, because it's a, you know, firm tile type of thing. So I'll go and I'll spray seal this and I'll bring it back in here and you can take a look and see what it looks like. All right, I think that is about right. Okay, with my white pigment ink. I'm going to illuminate some of those areas within the windows a little bit more. I'll just get a little bit of variation in it. That was my kind of spoon scratch knife. And this is my straight one. Occasionally you need to take this and put it on like a straight grinding stone or some fine grained sandpaper and just kind of buff it out like that a little bit. Not too much, otherwise you'll file away too much. And then I just kind of hone it like that with a couple strokes, and it makes the edge nice and sharp. Okay. Let's get a little bit of detailing on this roof, maybe a little bit of texture, wood grain texture. That. The process is kind of addictive. You just kind of want to keep kind of playing around with it, which you can do. I'll conclude here shortly. Now, see these branches right here in the foreground? Let's see what we can do here as far as putting a little bit of lighting on them. I don't know if you can see right here. I've kind of illuminated those little areas like that. See, the light is coming from here, so I've kind of illuminated that side of the wrench. Let me see if I can hold this in my hand. I'll do a little bit of illumination on that Spanish moss like that. So it's kind of fun to do. It's just like reiterating your light direction. Doesn't it make the Spanish moss stand out a little bit more? You can see the difference between here and here. I think that looks good too. That gives it a little bit more detail. Looks a little bit more three-dimensional that way. Let's add some to this too. Now see how I flip this upside down so I can access it easier. See, this branch right here is in front of this tree, so I can just kind of, kind of embellish with a light scratch here or there. I try to keep it consistent. If it's on the bottom of the branch, then I keep putting it on the bottom of the branch. Those little scratches. See that right there? These ones are very subtle. I didn't put too much of a highlight. I can do a little bit more, but oh, I don't know. I don't want to go overboard. See this cypress knee right here? Well, let's bring it out a little bit more, so like that maybe. All right. See those cypress knees? It's on the scratches on the right side of these ones, and I put it on the left side of these ones because the light is kind of coming from right here. All right, I can do this forever, but let's conclude. And all right, so let's take a look at it right here. You can see the finish on it. I'm going to go outside and spray it with an acrylic spray, and I'll bring this in, and you can do a little comparison contrast with it. Okay, I hit this with some Krylon UV clear. I don't know if you can tell the difference. I think it made the darker areas around here a little bit deeper. In the interior, it didn't change it too much, though. But there's a uniformity to the surface quality now. But look at this. I don't know. You might be able to see a little bit of a kind of a textural change, where I put those. So you can see where I've like scored into the surface, with that that scratch along that cypress right there. But see, I'm trying not to gouge into this board too much when I am doing something. I mean, you can certainly do something, you can do some kind of like German expressionism or something like that with deep gouges where it looks more like a woodcut print. You can kind of do that. You usually don't want to gouge into your past the clay into the panel. No, I mean, it takes a lot to do that, so it's not like you have to be really super careful about it. But okay, I'm looking for my Brilliance Galaxy Gold, I think. Or the black would look good on here too, but let's try the gold first, okay? So this is some pigment ink, but see these edges right here, around here? I find that kind of boring, just exposed wood. So what I like to do is I like to take a pigment ink, and I like to go into this like this. I just tap it right into it. So I'm just going like this, and you start to build up some gold. If I have enough ink on here, if it's not dry. I think, okay, my pad's a little bit dry. Let me pause, and I'm going to read. Okay, I probably put too much. Look at that slathering of re-inker fluid on there. All right, so that should be a lot faster, though, at least. Okay, so I'm just going to dab it in here. Make sure I don't go over the front of it too much. I like it where it goes over the front of it a little bit because it does give it a little bit of a kind of a framing, an extra framing type of look to it. But I don't want to do too much because I've just slathered so much on here. All right, so let's do a comparison. See, here's the edge on this side. And now here's this. It's like gold, right? So, I mean, it just looks so much better, I think, as a finished piece, especially because this is going to be lifted off of whatever surface you put it on. Okay, so let's just do this over the whole thing. Okay. All right, see that right there? One side, the other side. Doesn't that look good? I like silver for my blue color schemes. You can use black. You can use other colors of pigment, not just the metallics. I happen to like the metallics a lot. Let me see this, where I've kind of gone over my side here. Let me see if I can just kind of use some of that. I went over it too much. There was some blobby paint there. I call it paint. It's, ink. Let me just get some of that off here. Comes right up because we spray sealed it, so it's sprayed off with that acrylic, acrylic paint. So you can just wipe off if you get some over the front of it or too much of it. All right, so that looks pretty good. Let me go a little bit more on this side. Yeah. All right, so not that we're trying to fool our, fellow stamper or something like that, but when you do this on the side with that gold like that, then they really don't know what you did, to get this panel like this. Okay, so this being said, what I like to do is I like to mat this off. Now this is wet right here. I'm not going to show an example, but this is like a pre-folded card. And, I would probably throw like I don't know, you can use like a mat on, this is like a Star Dream gold right here. Maybe I'll use this one, especially now that I have all that paint on it, but this fits pretty good, like on this. And that's all sloppy. I'm going to use the other side of it if I use this, so I don't know. I would probably do like a little white border on here, but like something like that. And then you can put it on like a pre-folded card, or, just make your card whatever card you're doing. But this is an example. I'm not pasting it down, but just giving you an example of what this looks like here. It's really on this side, but just for an example of the look of it here. But look at this right here. Nice and firm and almost like a glazed tile type of thing. But look at that. See that? The weight of this, too. It's a visual weight, too, kind of, because it's raised like that. But, I don't know. That makes for a really nice-looking card, I think. And there's a weight to it. You can still mail them out in an envelope or whatever, but it's going to weigh it's going to weigh more, like a 3.5. This is probably like a 3-ounce piece right here, as far as mailing. But it's extra special with that extra weight to the board, the three-dimensional aspect of it, and just, I don't know. It's just the overall thing. It feels like it's a heavy thing. It's almost like it's almost like a professionally printed whatever it is, whatever you put on there. It doesn't have to be landscape stamping, like I said, but just the different textural things you can do in here. Let's take a look at some of the, like the cypress right here. You can see all the little details in there with that scratching ability. Right down here. I usually do that type of thing with a white paint pen. I reveal these little highlights and whatnot, or I don't reveal them, I add them in. This is kind of revealing where you're scratching back into it, like that. Okay, and I don't know if you can see here, sorry, but like in here, okay, I've sprayed it over, but you can still see those little highlights on that hanging moss like that. But Look at how beautiful that looks there. I sprayed it with the Krylon UV resistant clear, which is kind of glossy, but it doesn't. This one looks to me like a more satin finish to it. But fun stuff. Okay, so anyways, that is my latest example of some Stampbord. And again, you can find it on different websites. I know Dick Blick has like this bulk pack of it. They might have the smaller packs as well. But I don't know, look for it in different types of sizes too, like with in the convention of Claybord Smooth. It's out there. Play around with it in terms of different embellishments. I don't know if you have some kids that you stamp with, grandkids, whatever. You know, make little things like this and make magnets for the refrigerator. We did that in my son's preschool class, and we still have his pieces up. And I've been told by other people that they, you know, they still have those pieces that the kids did when they were, you know, for Christmas gifts for the parents from preschool. Of, you know, I don't know, magnets, just refrigerator magnets, stay up forever. And pins, you can get those little pin backings with that little adhesive, and you put it on, you know, and you can make a pin out of it. But the magnets are really fun for the kids. You can do them in different colors and whatnot, you know, in different types of shapes, and you can stamp different things on it and whatnot. It could even be some kind of educational little tool. But as far as an art piece, and as far as the abilities that you have on there, using your different tools and whatnot, you can come up with your own tools. You can use sandpaper in different grits. Steel wool is also something that you can use on here to give you a very fine type of removal. I did an additive type of white on here, but you can take steel wool and do a subtractive type of thing, and it gives you this kind of, you know, very soft removal of media, which might look akin to the white from the pigment ink here. So steel wool, I know there's another type of thing, but anything you could think of like that, you know, is a potential subtractive type of tool for this material. Okay, so if you like this video, I hope you hit the like button, and if you feel so inclined to subscribe to the channel. And I want to thank you as always for tuning in to Stampscapes 101.